the little kind of black Coca-Cola can size thing on the left side, that is the camera that's taking images that you see on the TV screen down there, or that took images.
So this guy took this image here?
Yep.
That's nuts.
I was recently invited to visit Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona. This place was flippin' radical, and there have been a ton of amazing scientific discoveries that have been made there. The story of how Lowell got its start and what it's accomplished in just over 100 years is nothing short of incredible. So now I'm gonna share some of it with you. But before I do, I want to thank the sponsor of today's video, Brilliant! Brilliant is an everyday learning app that allows users of all ages to learn real math and science with fun, interactive lessons right on your phone. And they're offering my subscribers a 30-day free trial plus 20% off an annual subscription to Brilliant Premium for the first 200 people that go to brilliant.org/Forrest Valkai. Brilliant offers thousands of courses with exclusive new content being added every single month. And if you're interested in the kinds of things in this video, they even have a whole course on astrophysics so you can learn about matter and gravity, the life cycles of stars, the fundamentals of cosmology, and even the fate of the universe. Your brain is a muscle, you gotta work it out. So head over to brilliant.org/Forrest Valkai to start your 30-day free trial today. And hurry, because the first 200 people get 20% off an annual subscription to Brilliant Premium. Thanks so much to Brilliant for sponsoring this video. Now let's talk about space. I arrived at the observatory as soon as they opened, and I met up with my friend Ariel. She's an astrophysicist and a senior educator there at Lowell, and she showed me a ton of cool stuff. The first of which being the thing that I was probably the most excited to see, the Tombaugh telescope. Clyde Tombaugh was a farmer with a passion for astronomy. In his early 20s, he built several telescopes on his family's farm, using car parts, farming equipment, and whatever else he had lying around. And this one is still on display here at Lowell.
Right here, there's a little secret. Apparently Clyde wrote this on the telescope. It says, "Do not meddle."
Do not what?
Do not meddle. Because he didn't want people messing.
The astronomers there at Lowell Observatory were so impressed by Clyde's ingenuity and dedication to science that they offered him a job in 1929. And just 1 year later, on February 18th, 1930, Clyde discovered Pluto using this astrograph.
So you'd slide 13 by 17 inch glass plates into here. Down here, sort of like the camera eyepiece.
The images from those plates were then reviewed using this blink comparator, which flashes back and forth between two images of the exact same part of the sky taken about a week apart. If anything changes between those two images, that means that it must be close enough to be able to detect that movement. See that tiny little arrow right there? That arrow is pointing at Pluto. That's what Clyde saw. And not only does the observatory still have Tombaugh's equipment on display, they even have his notebooks, so you can see the way that he meticulously wrote down everything that he saw. And I don't know why, but that makes the discovery of Pluto just so much more personal to me. Now, Pluto got demoted from a planet to a dwarf planet back in 2006, and a lot of people are still pretty upset about that. But trust me, you want it that way. You see, in order to be classified as a planet, you need to meet 3 qualifications. Number 1, you have to be orbiting a star, which Pluto is. Number 2, you have to be big enough to be crushed into a sphere, which Pluto is. But number 3, you have to be big enough to clear out everything else in your orbital path around that star, which Pluto isn't. It is one of the biggest things in the Kuiper Belt, but it's still just a thing in the Kuiper Belt. It's surrounded by stuff that it isn't big enough to absorb. There are moons in our solar system that are bigger than Pluto. Even Australia is bigger than Pluto. And there are other dwarf planets out there that rival Pluto in size. So unless you want to memorize the thousands of other things in our solar system that are all bigger than Pluto and call all of those planets too, I suggest that we just stick with the dwarf planet classification. Lowell Observatory is pretty famous for the discovery of Pluto, which they should be. That's totally reasonable. But as cool as that discovery was, in my opinion, it's not the coolest thing that happened at Lowell. For that, we need a little bit of history. You see, Lowell Observatory was founded in 1894 by Dr. Percival Lowell, with the main intention of searching for intelligent life on Mars.
That's Percival Lowell's chair? It looks like an old dining room freaking rocker. That's crazy.
It was a chair from his dining room kitchen.
Are you kidding?
His kitchen table, yeah.
That's great.
Like many other astronomers of his time, Lowell had been inspired by the work of Italian astronomer Giovanni Schiaparelli, who had been documenting what appeared to be straight channels across the surface of the red planet. He called these channels canali, which was mistranslated into canals, which combined with the seemingly straight nature of these so-called structures led people to believe that this was clear evidence of intelligent life that was building massive canals to transport water from the polar ice caps to major cities across the planet's surface. But remember, this wasn't that crazy of a thing to believe at the time. In fact, belief in Martian canals persisted until 1965, when Mariner 4 completed the first successful flyby of Mars and sent back images of a barren and desolate landscape completely devoid of any canals or cities. And as for what these astronomers were actually probably seeing...
So we think all of these people were straining their eyeballs so hard that they were mapping their cataracts.
But that's not the point of the story. What is important is that in 1901, Lowell hired a new astronomer named Vesto Slipher to help with his research. Slipher immediately began compiling observations about the climate and the atmosphere of Mars and building evidence for the presence of polar ice caps. Also, fun fact, about 30 years after this point, Slipher would be the one who actually hired Clyde Tombaugh, who then discovered Pluto. How cool is that? In 1912, Slipher began using the 24-inch Clark telescope. This big guy is 32 feet tall. That's as tall as a T-Rex is long. It's the same telescope that was used to map out the surface of the moon so that we knew where to land back in 1969, and it's still being used every day.
Say that again.
Yeah. The tires that we use to rotate the dome are 1949 Ford Business Coupe tires.
That's fantastic. Terrifying.
So anyway, Slipher starts using this telescope to observe what he calls spiral nebulae, and at the time, these were believed to be protoplanetary systems. But in fact, they were something just a little bit bigger. What he was looking at were actually other galaxies. One of the first galaxies that Slipher studied was Andromeda, and by tracking its radial velocity, he found that it was moving towards us at an alarming rate. He then turns his attention to other galaxies and starts carefully calculating the velocities of over a dozen of them, and finds that they're mostly moving away from us and all at different speeds. In 1914, he presented his findings to the American Astronomical Society with the shocking conclusion that he isn't really quite sure why this is happening. But one person in the audience of that presentation would be the one to find the answer, a new astronomer named Edwin Hubble, who used Slipher's data to show that other galaxies are moving away from ours at a velocity that is directly proportional to their distance, with more distant galaxies moving at a faster rate. This was the first observational evidence that the universe is expanding. A popular way to think about this is in terms of raisin bread. As the bread rises and expands, the raisins move apart from each other. If two raisins start out close together, then there's only a little bit of bread between them that's expanding, so they move apart from each other pretty slowly. But if those two raisins start out far apart, then there's already a lot of bread between them to expand, and so they move apart from each other even faster because there's more expansion between them taking place. So even though all the bread is expanding at the same rate, if two raisins are already far apart, there is more bread between them to expand at that same rate, so you have a higher net rate of expansion. And similarly, all space is expanding at the same rate, but two galaxies that are already far apart have a lot more space between them to expand, and so they move apart more rapidly. So Hubble starts gathering up data from all sorts of different galaxies and plotting on a big graph their velocities and their distances, and he comes up with a remarkably straight line. The slope of that line is called Hubble's constant, and it is the average recession rate of galaxies, the expansion rate of the universe. And since it's now apparent that velocity and distance are directly proportional, we can use that to come up with Hubble's law. Velocity equals Hubble's constant times distance, something that we now understand as a fundamental rule of the cosmos. But that's not all. Using some basic algebra, you can rearrange Hubble's law to come up with the inverse of Hubble's constant. 1 over Hubble's constant equals distance over velocity. And it just so happens that distance over velocity equals time. So 1 over Hubble's constant is the amount of time since the cosmos began expanding, which comes out to about 13.8 billion years. You can use this formula to calculate the time since the Big Bang. We just went from unidentified stellar objects to the first studies into redshifting to calculating the age of the universe, and it all happened because Percival Lowell looked too hard at nothing and thought he saw Martians. How wild is that? Now, because this is an observatory, I made sure to hang around after nightfall to get a good look at the night sky. Here on the open deck observatory, they have some of the most advanced telescopes on the whole campus.
This is one of the largest telescopes available for public viewing in the world. So this is a solar telescope.
So 20 seconds from this boy here, and they said 2 hours
Around.
from this guy here? That's an insane difference.
So this is a refracting scope, so it uses lenses instead of mirrors. It is a 5.5-inch refractor. I believe it has like a fluoride-infused lens, so it limits the amount of chromatic aberration that we get. Even though it's so small, it's like so clear. It's like drinking the coldest glass of water. The mead, that's a 16-inch in the back. He's just kind of like there.
Don't let him hear you. He's right in the room. Jesus.
One of my favorite things about this place is because these instruments are so incredibly precise and need to be pointed at exactly the same place in the night sky for a very long time, it doesn't really make sense for them to be picked up and moved outside every night. So instead, the whole building just moves around them. I'm sure that for all the astronomers and astrophysicists watching this is a no-brainer, but for a biologist, that's pretty freaking crazy. But what I think is even more cool about this is that these telescopes are on stands that can be raised or lowered so that anybody can use them. And the telescopes automatically adjust for the change to stay focused on the same spot.
That's so cool.
So that's why these mounts are like 10K.
Bro.
That is some unbelievably sensitive and expensive technology just to make sure that this scientific equipment is as accessible as possible, and I think that that is freaking awesome. Once it got dark enough, Ariel also let me play around with the Dyer telescope, which was immensely cool. You can tell this thing you want to look at just about anything in the night sky, and it will automatically orient itself to that location. Then you use this little Xbox controller to fine-tune your view, and voila, you've got an immensely cool experience on your hands.
So the stars at the bottom are as sharp as I can get them.
Okay.
Right in the middle, there's 2 fuzzy bits.
2 fuzzy bits.
Those are 2 galaxies eating each other right now. You can only see the centers.
I see the 2 fuzzy things. And those are 2 cannibalistic galaxies happening.
It's this.
It's that.
Yeah.
Oh my glob.
For the record, that's M51, 2 galaxies that are in the process of eating each other. And you can notice how the one on the left is much more massive, so it's definitely gobbling up the one on the right, but the one on the right still does have mass, which is having an observable effect, bending the arm of the big galaxy to an almost 90-degree angle. And we saw so many other cool things with this telescope, like the Orion Nebula, or my favorite, the Crab Nebula. And when you compare the kinds of images that we're able to achieve today to those taken at this very observatory just over 100 years ago, it really makes you appreciate just how exciting this field of study is and just how fast it's moving. Like when I think about the progress made in my field just since the discovery of the structure of DNA, it fills me with wonder. But then I have to remember that my field is just studying one phenomenon on this one planet, and things like astronomy are studying literally everything else happening everywhere else. And that's pretty cool. Biology is cooler though, and you astronomers are gonna need it someday, so be nice. Honestly, I've barely even scratched the surface of all the cool things that Lowell has to offer. So if you want to learn more about them and maybe even schedule a trip for yourself, I've linked their website down below. I will also be posting some bonus content about my trip to the observatory over on my Patreon, and if you want to follow Ariel and learn more about space from her, I'll link her stuff in the description as well. And with that, I'm Forrest Valkai. Thank you so much for watching, liking, commenting, subscribing, and all the other stuff you do here on YouTube. Please exit through the gift shop on your way out, pick up one of these sweet t-shirts. Have an awesome rest of your day, and never stop learning. Bye-bye!
kind of like trying to get a photo through those things you use in biolabs, you know what I mean?
Microscopes?
Microscopes. I was like, it's something scope, but it's not a telescope.
It is kind of the exact opposite when you think about it, yeah.